Salve Greece and Rome students, welcome back. Thank you guys for keeping up with chapter 9. I just want to remind you that tomorrow I'm not going to post any new notes or assignments or anything because it is Good Friday, so it's a school holiday. So today we'll kind of finish up our lessons for this week, and then probably Monday we'll finish up chapter 9 and head into chapter 10. We won't have a test until after chapter 10 for this big one, and there's some big events happening and what we're going to go over today. Hopefully, you just read this part in your book, so you already have some ideas about it. And I'll give some more explanation now. And remember, my notes, I always give you kind of exactly what I'm thinking is important and what I'm looking for and what's likely to be on the test. So that's why the notes are a good thing to go over. We finished up with Claudius, the fourth emperor of Rome, yesterday, and we talked about Claudius dying possibly at the hands of his fourth wife and niece, Agrippina the Younger, possibly poisoning him with a mushroom. Those are the rumors, and that's what a lot of people believe. But he may have also died from an illness, as he was already an older man. So, who became emperor after Claudius dies? Well, remember, he had his own son, but he had also adopted Nero, who was the son of his wife Agrippina, and he had actually kind of shown signs that Nero would be a successor rather than his own son Britannicus. So, true enough, when Claudius dies, Nero is the one chosen to succeed him. So you can see the years of Nero's reign here, 54 to 68 AD. And when he succeeded Claudius, he was only 16 years old. So, the youngest emperor so far. If Agrippina did kill Claudius, maybe she was thinking if her son becomes emperor at 16, he would be easier to manipulate, kind of a teenager, and he's not quite a full-grown man yet, and someone I can manipulate, who knows? Or maybe it really was just happenstance, and he became emperor at that time. When he became emperor in 54, there was high hopes that he would kind of continue on with some of the good things Claudius had done. We talked about Claudius being fairly good emperor, pretty even-keeled. When Nero became emperor, he promised good relations with the Senate. He was going to try to have good relations with them and not antagonize them or anything, and also with the equites and especially with the army. Every emperor wants to have good relations with the army. You pretty much can't hold on to your position with that. Also, since he was young, he needed some people there to kind of guide him along because he was only 16 upon becoming emperor. By the way, he's not nearly the youngest emperor. We'll get into some much younger emperors a little bit later, but he's the youngest emperor so far. One of his tutors and advisors is a very famous author that we know of called Seneca. Anytime I give you one of the Roman names, like right here, I put the capital. The capitals is the one that we like, kind of the most famous name. But his full name is Lucius Annaeus Seneca. He was Nero's tutor during this time period and also kind of an advisor as Nero grew up and learned how to govern. We know he was a brilliant author because we have some of the things he had written, philosophical works and treatises and things like that. He was born in Spain, and early in his reign, in Nero's reign, it's clear that he leaned on Seneca as well as a few other advisors to help him because, again, this was a big job for a 16-year-old to come into. Also, you have Nero's mother there, Agrippina. She was not someone just to sit back and let things happen. She wanted to, tell Nero some things he should do as well and kind of mold him. So Agrippina certainly tried to influence, especially early on whenever Nero was pretty young. And probably he got a little tired of his mom trying to tell him what to do. And we'll see what happens on this slide. One thing about Nero is he wasn't super interested in affairs of state and just all the nuances and details, whereas someone like Claudius was a little more into talking about those things. Nero was more interested in arts and performance. He thought of himself really as this world-class artist. Yeah, I'm going to be emperor and I'll have my guys doing this and that, but really my gift to the world is art. And he thought he could be maybe even like the greatest actor on the Roman stage. And as Nero got older and continued to be emperor, this got more and more where he separated himself from the affairs of state and went more and more into wanting to be an artist, an actor, a performer, rather than focusing on governing, and his advisors did more of that. One of his examples of being a showman, in 59, Nero staged a festival called the Juvenalia, and this festival meant he was like coming of age, and he shaved his beard for the first time. So that kind of shows you his not super modest to make everyone come gawk at you shaving your beard for the first time. So that was interesting. Now, he eventually got tired enough of his mother Agrippina trying to influence him and mold him and do what she wanted to him. So eventually he decided that mommy needs to go. And so he hatches this elaborate plan to put Agrippina on a ship, and then he orders some of his men, again secretly, to stage this shipwreck, and his mother would die in the shipwreck. This plan ends up going awry. It doesn't work. She doesn't die in the shipwreck. And shortly after that, he has some of his guards kill his mother more openly. So we are pretty sure that he killed his mother Agrippina. That gets her out of the picture, which is might be ironic because she probably had certainly had a hand in getting him to be emperor. She thought she could have a hand in it, and then he gets her out of the way. So Nero's reign is certainly one that we see as going downhill slowly, right? Caligula was a little more quick because we had that good year and things went down quickly. Nero's was kind of a roller coaster going up and then also going down. The people seemed like some things about Nero. They appreciated that he loved theater and that he would put on spectacles and performances for them. We know that the common people like that, but there were some things he did that they didn't like and they didn't react well to. For example, we know that he was married to Claudius's daughter, who was called Octavia, and he divorces Octavia in 62, and he ends up having her killed. This is not a normal thing to do whenever you divorce your wife, and the people would have thought this was very harsh. And apparently, there was riots around Rome when the news broke that he had put Octavia to death. We still don't know exactly why he did that, but that would be seen as not a just thing to do unless there was a very good reason for it. Another huge thing that happens during his reign is there's a large fire in Rome, and this fire happens in 64 AD, and there's all sorts of rumors fly about this. It's a massive fire. Thousands of people lose their homes and apartments and things like that. We don't know exactly who did it, but there was certainly a lot of people thought that maybe it was Nero who did it himself. Now, why would he start a fire? Well, after the fire, after the ground was cleared, a large palace started being built in the land that was cleared by the fire. And so people put together that, hey, Nero had someone start this fire because he wanted to clear the grounds for this massive palace that we'll talk about called the Golden House, the Domus Aurea. Lots of that palace have been destroyed because they hated Nero after his death, but there are still some parts of the Domus Aurea you can visit in Rome, the Golden House. So some people thought that Nero started the fire. Fires happen in the ancient world, so it could have just been something unrelated, but certainly that was the rumor. Now, as far as Nero, he of course didn't want people to blame him, so when he thought people were blaming him, he found another scapegoat. So there was a religious sect at this time that was very small, but kind of growing and it was not an official religion. They did not have temples or anything like that, but this was the Christians, right? Christ had only been crucified about 30 years before this or something. So again, very young religion. And these Christians, the Romans didn't know much about them. They heard rumors, but it was easy for Nero to say, hey, these Christians, these kind of suspicious people are the ones who started the fire because they're rabble rousers and they do things like this. And so Nero blamed it on the Christians. And this was the first systematic persecution of Christians in ancient Rome, because Nero had Christians, if people admitted to being Christian, he had them rounded up, he had them tortured, and even some public displays of torture to show the people they were being punished. So for Nero, at least, he said that it was Christians who did this. And even though most Romans, of course, were not Christians, they were pagans, and most people would have been skeptical of the Christians and kind of thinking some of their traditions sound weird and odd. But Nero took things to such a violent place with his torture that there is some evidence that the common people actually were more sympathetic to the Christians after this because they feel like they didn't deserve the harsh treatment at Nero's hands. So whereas before they didn't have much sympathy for the Christians, this might have ironically made them more sympathetic, being hurt so badly by Nero here. Nero was also unpopular in some other provinces, including Judea. Remember, the Jews had been very negative with Roman rule for a long time, especially under Caligula. We talked about the statue of Caligula being put in the Jewish temple. Nero was also unpopular, and a large Jewish revolt erupted near the end of Nero's reign in 66 AD, and there were several major Jewish revolts. We'll talk about some other ones later, but the Romans never quite got a perfect hold on Judea. Every once in a while, the Jews would kind of erupt into a large outbreak, a large revolt. So we called it the First Jewish Revolt because there's others. Now, the picture here, of course, we don't know if this is actually true, but of course, a famous saying about Nero is that he's the emperor that fiddled while Rome burned. In other words, He was happy to see Rome burn because he wanted the grounds to be cleared for his palace, the Domus Aurea and the Golden House. And so because he wanted to see it happen, so he was sitting there fiddling and playing his lyre as Rome burned. We don't know that for sure. That may just be a legend about that, but certainly that's, if anyone's heard anything about Nero, a lot of times it's, oh yeah, he's the guy who fiddled while Rome burned. Nowadays that's a saying, isn't it? If you say someone's fiddling while Rome is burning, you mean that there's disaster going on and they're just kind of like not paying much attention to it and just kind of whistling through it. So that's the picture there, what it represents. All right. Some other things that happened during Nero's reign, and as we get towards the end of his reign in 62 AD, Nero devalued the currency. What that means is, and that happens nowadays too, is if a government prints more money because they don't have enough of it to spend, or they need to pay soldiers, or they have, who knows, there's going to be a lot of reasons you do this. But basically, devaluing means you print more money, and so all the money is worth less. And so let's just say that the government of Rome makes twice as much money in circulation as was in circulation the year before. That's going to be worth a lot less. That's called inflation. And part of that was because Nero had spent so recklessly. One of the things he spent on was his massive palace that, again, just took up, hundreds of times the normal home in Rome was the Golden House. He also revived Tiberius's treason laws in 62. We talked about how unpopular those were, especially with the senators. And so he's getting more, towards the end of his reign in 62, he's getting more suspicious of people, more negative, and more of a confrontational relationship with the Senate and also with the people of Rome. In 65, he forces his tutor, who we talked about, Seneca, to commit suicide. This is a pretty harsh thing, but over time it seemed he was kind of bristling at Seneca's advice. He was thinking, I'm old enough now, I can handle this. And he thought that Seneca was kind of trying to control him and hold him back. And so this is actually how Seneca dies, at the hands of Nero, or at least forced by Nero. So around 65 was a big turning point. People start to kind of view him almost like Caligula, where he's dangerous. Who knows whom he could turn against next, and he's seen as a danger. Around the year 65, it seems like legitimate plots start popping up to take out Nero, because he's seen as, the people don't like him much anymore. His support is falling all around him. In 65, one of the major conspiracies we know about, at least, to take down Nero was called the Pisonian Conspiracy. The ringleader was a Roman called Piso. That was a prominent family. You've heard about other Pisos. But this conspiracy, it was discovered and rooted out, but it showed that there were conspiracies taking place and that there was people at the top of the ladder, like senators involved in that, but also people further down. It shows that people at different levels of society had started hating Nero, and it's kind of risky to plot against the emperor, so they were willing to go through with that risk. That's how unpopular and negative Nero had become. It got so bad by the year 68 that in 68, revolts actually sprang up around the empire to Nero's rule. So the empire is just not willing to listen to Nero anymore, and basically his support is just crumbling everywhere. So you have revolts spring up in Gaul and Germany. Finally, the Senate decides Nero cannot be saved, and the Senate basically disowns Nero and declares him hostis, which is the Latin word for an enemy of the state. So the Senate no longer supports him. The army in many places is not supporting him. And eventually the walls are closing in around Nero. He can tell the writing on the wall, basically. He doesn't have enough support to keep power. And probably he's going to be, who knows, he could be very viciously captured and tortured. So eventually, before this can happen, Nero commits suicide sometime in June of 68 AD. And with his death, we see the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. That's what we call the first five emperors, because those are the families they're from. Nero doesn't have any descendants to become the next emperor, so we are going to have a completely different imperial line after Nero. His last words, supposedly, that he said, again, this could be legendary or something, but supposedly his last words were "Qualis artifex pereo," which is "what an artist dies with me." And I like to believe those were his last words, because what a pompous set of last words from Nero. So that's interesting. So Nero dies in 68. Now imagine what's happening in 68. Nero dies. He has no successor. There's no one hiding in the curtains like Claudius. What's going to happen at this point? Well, I mean, what happens when there's a huge power vacuum like this? People want to compete for that power. And this leads to a very chaotic period where no one knows who the next emperor will be and what's going to happen. And so you have different men vying for it. So I'm going to try to explain as best I can what happens over this next year, but it is a chaotic time period in Rome. So things will be moving quickly and happening. And this next year, after Nero dies, is called, let me just get myself out of the way, 69 is very famously called the year of the four emperors because, sure enough, there was four emperors in that one year in Rome. And I'll tell you exactly how that happened. So whenever Nero dies, the Senate wants to declare their own emperor, someone who's going to be friendly to them, someone coming from their ranks, someone they can trust, and they go with one of their own called Galba. Galba is declared princeps, which is kind of what we're calling the emperor at the time. Galba was 71 years old, from a distinguished patrician family. It makes sense they would pick someone on the older side. They're not looking to pick an emperor that's going to be emperor for 40 years. They want someone, maybe he's emperor for a few years, 3, 4, 5 years, someone that, then another one will have a chance. So when the Senate got to pick an emperor, a lot of times they did pick an older person. You see that happening nowadays with like popes and stuff. A lot of times, they're not picking 20-year-old popes, they're picking older guys. So Galba was chosen by the Senate, and he had been out on assignment in one of the provinces. He made his way to Rome and arrived in Rome by October of that year, and basically had hoped to consolidate his power. He seems to fail to win the favor of the common people. He suspended public games, which is never popular. He didn't win over the Praetorians, and they were the ones who really control the safety of the city. And also, he did not pay them a donative. And what that means is a donative is like a fee or a gift you pay to the soldiers for doing something for you. And so when the Praetorians turned on Nero, the idea was that the next emperor would pay them kind of a little gift, a little thank you for doing that. And when he didn't do that, he failed to get the Praetorians on his side. Probably we would consider that bribery basically, but probably a strategic mistake by Galba. A lot of the soldiers were also unhappy. 8 legions in Germany decided Galba is not who we want to be emperor, and so they declared their own emperor, their general, called Aulus Vitellius. And if you're a soldier, you would prefer your general to be emperor because he's going to be loyal to you. He owes you for getting him on the imperial seat. So if you can make that happen and make that stick, that's going to lead to huge financial benefits for you in the future. So if you're paying attention right now, we have Galba and Vitellius at the same time being declared emperor by different factions and different groups of soldiers. But both of them have a very tenuous hold on that at this point. So 2 emperors at the same time, and Vitellius, his soldiers declare him emperor in January of 69. Now, you have a third general. Again, there was no rule book. There was no constitution. There's no one to say, here's what happens when one of them dies. So a third general, his soldiers decided he could do a better job than the others, and this is Marcus Salvius Otho. We could just call him Otho. He got the backing of the Praetorians for himself through bribing of Praetorians, probably bribing of the prefects, and promises of different things that would come in the future. So you have Galba, you have Otho, you have Vitellius, 3 different politicians and generals declaring themselves or being declared emperor at some time. The first one of them to go down was Galba. Galba was killed by a mob, as far as we know, sometime in mid-January of 69. So he's considered the first emperor of 69 AD, Galba. At that time, the Senate had been behind Galba. Now they switched their support to Otho. Okay, he was declared emperor by the Senate. Vitellius, of course, had been out with his legions. He slowly made his way back from Germany to Rome. And of course, there's going to be a showdown now between Vitellius and Otho's armies. They clashed in northern Italy in April of that year, 69. And this is called the Battle of Bedriacum, and this battle went badly for Otho, and Otho ends up losing the battle and committing suicide after the battle rather than being captured. Vitellius, Galba's dead, Otho is dead. Vitellius now considers himself the remaining emperor, and he moves into Rome basically to take control of the city after this victory. We consider him kind of an indecisive emperor. None of these emperors are emperors for more than 6 months at the very most. Some of them just a few months, right? So it's hard to judge their reign per se. Like, what can you really say that Galba did? He was emperor for about 6 months or so. Really, the only thing any of these guys did was try to solidify their position and solidify their power. So you have another contender. Now that Vitellius has left in July of 69, you had the troops in Judea and Syria declared their general, and we call him Vespasian, Titus Flavius Vespasianus. They decided these guys in Rome aren't going to cut it. Our guy needs to be emperor. So Vespasian is declared emperor by his troops. So he has to start slowly making his way. He actually doesn't want to hurry. It's actually probably smart that he didn't hurry. The idea was, hey, I hear there's guys already fighting in Italy. If I kind of slowly make my way back, I can let them fight it out and then come in and maybe win decisively. So Vespasian also was able to pick up support of the prefect of Egypt, Tiberius Julius Alexander. That would be a big deal. We talked about how important strategically Egypt was. So when he got the support of Egypt, that was a big deal. So Vitellius was technically emperor in Rome, but you have Vespasian being declared emperor by his soldiers outside of Rome, and he's going to slowly start making his way back. Vitellius, though, wasn't becoming popular as emperor. There was a famine that was emerging. You can imagine that the grain supply is not being well cared for during this crazy turbulent time. I mean, imagine if this happened. We can't even imagine it, but imagine if nowadays if you had 4 different presidents in one year and they were all fighting and killing each other, right? It would just be a ridiculous thing. So it's hard to even keep track of who's emperor at the time, literally. So a famine was emerging. Vitellius's troops were being too rough with the people to try to keep order in the city, and they were being sometimes violent and abusive. And the general thought on Vitellius by the people was that he was an inept leader and not really doing well. So people weren't that enamored with Vitellius enough to fight against Vespasian when he finally came in. Vespasian picked up support as he marched through Italy. He would go through various provinces, and Vitellius didn't have strong support. People would throw their support behind Vespasian. So his army, his support actually grew as he made his way to Italy. In October, Vitellius's forces fought against Vespasian's forces. By the way, Vespasian wasn't actually there yet. He sent a group of his forces kind of ahead of him. But in October, Vitellius' forces were defeated at the Battle of Cremona. And in December of that year, 69, Vespasian's troops, with Antonius Primus in the lead. Vespasian wasn't leading the troops at that time. They basically stormed Rome, and Vitellius was killed. That's when Vitellius is finally taken out. And this is when Vespasian takes control of Rome. Again, he's not even quite there yet, but he had so much support. His soldiers were so good that Vespasian is kind of the last man standing. So this year we have Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and now Vespasian. That's 4 emperors of the same year if you're keeping track. You can imagine what's going on in Rome at this time. This would be a terrible time to live in Rome. I mean, we look back at this kind of excitingly, and this is interesting and everything, and it is. But to live in Rome at this time would just be terrible because things would not be running well in the city at this time. There's fighting going on. The city's being stormed by troops and everything. This would be not a good time to live in Rome. The grain supply is running short, etc. But Vespasian is the last man standing. And he's declared emperor by the Senate in December. Basically, they have no other choice. He's got a huge army, and he's the last man standing here. And he actually doesn't reach Rome until the next year, but he is declared emperor in 69. So we consider him the 4th emperor of 69 AD. His son Domitian had gone ahead of him, and his son Domitian stayed in control of the city until Dad came to relieve him. So again, these 18 months of civil war from when Nero died in June of 68 to December of 69 would have been a terrible time for Rome. Cities getting destroyed. Civil wars were expensive, so money's not being spent on the right things, on grain and roads and buildings and things like that. And also think about, we had this massive civil war going on for 18 months. Rome's enemies don't just take a break. Rome's enemies are still causing trouble. So Rome is having to focus all their fighting on civil war, and you still have the Parthians out there causing trouble. You still have the Germans causing trouble. So just remember that those things are still an issue, even when Rome is at civil war. Or who knows how much better Rome could have done if they could have not had these frequent civil wars and taken their eye off their enemies. It also revealed the disunity, the fact that Nero commits suicide, and then all of a sudden you have 4 men fighting over the emperorship, right? It's not like they all got behind one person. And this turmoil made it clear that the dynasty, that Augustus' dynasty, you had to show the ability to be the Roman emperor, right? And Nero, at least, especially after partway into his reign, did not show that. So we would need another way to choose emperor. There's still not an official way, but of course Vespasian is now emperor, and he is in no way related to Augustus. So this is a completely different dynasty. And by the way, we call this the Flavian dynasty because Vespasian's name is Flavianus. Um, I'm going to tell you more about Vespasian. He actually comes up in the next chapter, so we're going to hold off. He has a pretty important emperor. He stays emperor for a while, for about the next 10 years or so. So we'll talk more about Vespasian in the next chapter. There's a little more in this chapter, but I'm going to stop there today because that's a good stopping place. There's a few more bits in this chapter about different parts of Rome at this time. What's the army going like? What's it like living in the city during this time? What's the economy like, etc. So we'll do kind of some Roman culture bits. I'm not going to post those until Monday, though, because tomorrow's Good Friday. So you guys have the Easter weekend to spend with your family, and Friday will be a holiday. Okay. But on Monday, I will come back and wrap up chapter 9 with you guys. And if you need anything from me, make sure to keep in touch. Let me know how the chapter's going. Pop into my office hours or send me a message. And after chapter 9, we will get into chapter 10 on the Flavian emperors and some of the later emperors also. Okay. Hope you guys are doing well. I wish you a very happy Easter weekend, and I'll check in with you again on Monday. Walete.